Hello and welcome to episode number 260. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I am Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. It seemed that in the final weeks of 2013, project management was on everyone's mind, and not in a good way. The rollout of the Affordable Care Act website really brought to light that substandard project performance can have disastrous effects on public perception. While we often hear about failed government projects, failed private sector projects seem to fly under the radar. In today's interview, we welcome Todd C. Williams, who has spent the past 25 years advising Fortune 500 companies on what to do about projects that are either headed for a cliff or have already gone over. We begin the interview by looking at what makes government projects uniquely susceptible to a higher failure rate than private sector projects, and then move into 7 steps that Todd recommends for recovering a troubled project. And now, motion to move forward with the interview. Seconded, and here we go.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with Todd Williams, expert witness, executive consultant, and president of eCameron.
Hello, Todd, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Well, welcome, Cornelius. Hope you're having a great day.
I am, thank you very much. But it seems to me that there are some people out there who are not having a great day, because we are hearing a lot about seemingly failed projects, especially from the public sector these days. And that's why we have brought you on, because one of your expertise is turning projects around. So tell me, are government projects more likely to fail than the ones in the private sector?
Well, I think in general, no, but they definitely get a lot more visibility. I mean, nothing spells a day worse than having CNN at your front door when you get up in the morning, which I think has probably happened to a lot of people when we look at, healthcare.gov, what's going on with air traffic control, with all the other projects that are out there. But I think that you'll also see that there's other projects that are equally as bad, and that is, places out there like the Boeing 787. I mean, it was how many years late was it? Once it got flying, then it started having batteries that would just kind of spontaneously catch on fire. So, those projects do seem to hit both the private and public sector. I think the private sector, by just the nature of the name, is able to keep it a little more private.
Are there any characteristics, any components that favor one type of projects over the others in regards to success?
Well, I do think that the private sector projects do have one very nice feature about them, and that is that they're autocratic by nature, right? There's someone who's at the top that actually does say, this is the direction we're going to go, and everybody needs to kind of fall in line. There may be some level of, what do we call it, democracy or getting your ideas together whenever you're trying to figure out what projects to run and where the company wants to go. But once that decision is made, once the quote-unquote vote gets taken, then everyone has to jump on board and toe the line. We've got to all follow that direction. Otherwise, we don't have a job. In the public sector, you don't quite have that. Once you have a vote and you say, hey, we're going to go this direction, it could be 51% in favor of some sort of initiative or care or whatever, and all of a sudden the other 49 want to continue to fight about it afterwards, then that's going to cause a problem. And so you're going to continue to have that. And if you don't have everybody on board to make things work, then a public sector project is going to have a lot more trouble. There's other things. Even if you did get everybody on board and everyone's moving down the line the way they need to, then all of a sudden an election comes up and the administration changes. And, those happen in most cases in every 2 years. Sometimes it's 4 years, but there's always some cycle that goes on in that 2-year realm. And if things start to sway one way or the other, then you start losing sponsorship, you start losing drive. So there's a lot of other factors that happen in a public sector project that make it a little more cantankerous, let's say.
Why do we hear so much more about failed or seemingly failed government projects, but not really all that much from the private sector? I mean, if you had to, if you ask me, what's the last big failed project you heard of, I'd go, in the private sector, like you said, the Boeing, right, the Dreamliner. That's about it that I can instantly remember.
That's true, and part of the reason is because who really knows about those failures in the private sector are maybe stockholders, and even then, some of them don't even see what's going on. Private sector does have the lack of transparency that they don't have to show things to the public as much as you do whenever you're actually dealing with a public sector project. By definition, a public sector project has to be able to say, here's what's going on, and here are the deadlines, and here's what we're doing. In addition, public sector projects usually have the public as the user. So instead of having something that maybe is a business-to-business type relationship and might fail, now we're having something where some sector of the population is using it, and it's blaringly obvious that something isn't working right and things are falling apart and people are getting frustrated and upset. So it's very hard to hide something that's failed in some sort of government job. Where if you're with Boeing and you're trying to put together something else for some other company, you can tend to hide that because the general public isn't out there actually experiencing it on a firsthand basis. So I think the problems exist, and probably some of the bigger, more beautiful failures actually happen in private industry. You just don't see them so much.
Do we as citizens have an effect on the success or failure of a government project?
Oh, I think we very much do. When we're looking at, let's go right back to what I said at the beginning, and that is if 51% of the people vote to have something be put into place and a project goes in around that, and 49% of the people still are fighting against it, then yes, we're going to have a huge effect making that project fail. If instead we say, okay, that's the way we're going to go, and we have to live with it, and then we jump on board and try to make it the best thing we can and try to move and be a positive force in that, then I think we can make it move forward. And that is no comment one way or the other, Democrat or Republican, and I want to diffuse that from the current situations that we have out there. Because if we go back through time, we'll see the same thing in other administrations where the quote-unquote losing party didn't get behind what was going on and didn't support it. And then things start to fail fairly rapidly.
All right. So these are all the reasons why public sector projects seemingly fail. Let's turn the ship around here and let's talk a little bit about what we can do about it, starting with from the 10,000 foot level and learn from the private sector. So what aspects of the private sector projects can we bring onto government projects to improve success rates?
Well, if we think about what really goes on in the private sector, we look at companies that do things like build airplanes or build trucks or build highways or buildings or whatever. And whenever they can't do something, they don't understand how to do it, they look to subcontractors and bring subcontractors in to help. So I may be putting together a office building, but whenever it gets to the HVAC or the metal work, then I go out to a sheet metal company. I actually hire them to come in and do the sheet metal work. I don't hire people and try to learn that trade myself. We do the same thing in many other companies, truck companies like Freightliner. They don't build trailers, they build actual trucks. And if they want trailers, they work with somebody else to build the trailer that goes with it. They don't build the entire thing. So I think that's one thing that the government can learn is from the private sector is to go out and hire subcontractors that have the specialties that they need, understand what your capabilities are and use those, but go hire other people in from the private sector to help. Now, that doesn't mean just the building. There may be a need that we actually have to have someone who runs that project from the outside. One of the things that I think that we see is that there's so many subcontractors or so many different groups that we have somebody who has to be in the middle to actually understand how to coordinate all those people and keep them all in line. And maybe that's not the strength of most public sector groups, is not being able to do that orchestration. And when you do that orchestration, it would be critical to be able to have somebody properly work that way. I think that we could probably learn a lot from that.
Are there any other things that the private industry does to improve their own success rate on projects?
Well, the one advantage they have is they have money. And
okay.
But that's a double-edged sword. So, when you have a project that needs more money and it's aligned with the strategic goals of a private sector company, then money appears to be able to make things happen in most cases. I mean, there's obviously cases where a company is short on cash and they can't move forward, but in most cases, you can, if it's really important and it's really part of the strategic plan, you can put more money at it and the project will succeed. In public sector, you normally don't have that. You have some fixed lid. So you've really kind of tied together the scope, the schedule, and the budget. And you've defined all three and said, this is what I'm going to do. And of course, we can't do that. We can only define two of those. And then the other one gets determined by how we figure out those first two. And so if you were to go in from a public sector standpoint and actually be realistic about what that project's going to take, I think that you would see a drastic change in how projects work in the public sector. What happens, and I have a lot of people who work out there in the public sector, and what happens is there's a lot of times whenever people say, well, I know it's going to cost me $15 million to do this, but I know we don't have it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell them it's $8 million. Because that'll at least get it started. And once we get into the $8 million, then a lot of people get upset, but they'll eventually give me the rest of the money. We have this big conflab going on. And it looks like a failed project whenever it was actually fully understood ahead of time it was going to cost $15 million. And I can probably go through a list of those that I know that have done that way. On the other side, back to the private sector, too much money can also make a project fail. Once you have a project that's flush with cash, the issue that you have is people aren't mindful of what they're actually spending. Scope starts to creep. Oh, yeah, I can do that. I got the extra budget to do that. And they get a little sloppy on how they're doing things. So there's the money issue has a double-edged sword to it. Anytime you see somebody with just a little bit too much money, you'll see that they have a lot of problems and can't get through things right.
In the final part of this interview, we want to give some advice to our listeners. And we decided to look at a list that you created. It's called the 7 Steps for Rescuing the Problem Project. And you told me before the interview, step 3 and 4, they could actually be combined depending on how detailed you want to go. This could be 1 or 2 steps. So it's either 6 or 7, but we're going to look at these as the 7 steps to rescuing the problem project. And you also said, let's start with number 7. So what is number 7? What is step 7 in your list? And why are we starting with 7 first?
Well, we're starting with 7 first because it's actually the failure prevention step. And the way some people think about this is they say, well, geez, we need to rescue the project. And I look at it more as a continuum, that you're starting with a project and it doesn't just flip into problems overnight. It actually is a continuum, and you have to be very aware of what stage that project is in and know what to apply based on what stage that project is in. So when it's first starting, it has a huge amount of potential for failure, even though we're all excited about it. And so you have to actually be fairly careful and kind of treat it like a failing project already. You have to look at just doing some of the basics. Don't over processify, if I can use that made up word there. Don't put too much process on it. Take a look at keeping it agile and lean. And I don't mean agile in the sense of an agile methodology, or it could be waterfall, but still leave it lean so that you can move things around and change it. You need to take a look at how to manage scope, documenting decisions, and making sure that the stakeholders get what they need. You're not really looking for what they want, because what they want may not be achievable. You really have to look at what they need and trim down and lean it down their goals to begin with. Make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that you're actually following the triple constraints. You can't tell someone what the scope, schedule, and budget is going to be. You can tell them the scope and the schedule maybe, and they'll tell you what the budget's going to be. Or you can tell them what the schedule and the budget is, and they can tell you what the scope is going to be. But you can't drive all three. I mean, really, if you try to do that, like I mentioned in some public projects, you're really just defining failure right there. I mean, it's a project that's just not going to be successful. The other big one is too many projects start with the goal of implementing technology to solve a problem. And technology generally doesn't solve problems. Taking a look at who the people are, what the processes are, how things are being done, and map that out properly, that's what solves a problem. What technology does is it makes it more efficient. It makes it faster. So if you don't first take a look at what the people and the processes are and you just apply technology on top of a problem, you don't solve the problem. You just make the problem get in trouble and happen faster and much more efficiently. So it really doesn't help out a whole lot. So that failure prevention is really paramount. And I think those are the three things that I see that are probably the biggest areas of being able to work on prevention failure.
All right, so prevent future failure is step 7 on your list, but we moved it all the way up front as step 0 here. So let's move on to step number 1. And this is the moment, I believe, when we move into the point where, whoops-a-daisy, the project seems to be failing.
That's true.
And step 1 is acknowledge the problem.
Yeah, denial is a big issue whenever you have a project that's not running right. People don't want to admit it's not working right. They don't want to admit failure. They think failure is bad. And that's not necessarily true. If you're in an innovative company and you're trying to do innovative things, you are going to fail a lot. And the key is that you're able to find that failure, define it, get away from it, and maybe cancel the whole project in its very fledgling stages so that you don't waste time, effort, and money. So knowing that that problem exists and be able to admit it is huge. I liken this a lot to any of the 12-step programs you see out there. You know, that very first step on all of those 12-step processes is admit there's a problem and that you need to work with it. And however many steps there are for recovery after that's kind of up for debate. But the actual mentioning and saying and agreeing that, yeah, I have an issue that needs to be taken care of and I need to get some help in here, that's huge. And if people do that, I think they'd find that a lot of the problems wouldn't become problems because you admit it and understand it before you dig the hole deep enough that nobody can get you out of that hole.
Step number 2, audit your projects.
Yeah, I don't understand why people haven't got to this point of more audits. And I am an advocate of having external people come in and audit not just the projects, but even groups inside a company. Maybe they're PMOs, maybe they're IT organizations. If you audit a project and just say, what's it really doing, and have someone from the outside look at it so that they can say, yes, this is working right, or no, this isn't, they can actually re-steer a project and help you with that denial step of, wait a minute, you're saying it's 7 and I'm seeing 12 here, so what's really going on? And be able to pull people out of a hole to take a look at things just a little bit differently. So auditing, to me, just like we do in a financial group, is really paramount in making sure that you are running a project correctly and that your organization is functioning efficiently.
All right, and then we get to steps 3 and 4, which you said, yeah, you can take them as 1 or as 2. We'll take them as 2, but we'll just discuss them as 1. So step 3, analyze the data and develop solutions. And then step 4, identify root causes and deploy changes effectively. Can you develop these 2 thoughts for us here, please?
Well, analyzing the data is pretty critical. If you don't have good data on what you're working with, you're never going to be able to go someplace with it. So how do you do that? Well, you work that with your team. And probably the biggest value you have is your team, your people that are working on the project, being able to find what's going on and analyze it and pull it up and let you see what that data is. If they're out there and they're having trouble doing this or having trouble doing that, or they're finding that someone else is not cooperating, you need to be able to pull all that data in so you as the project manager can actually have enough information to work with. Otherwise, if you're just working with the information that you have, you're really working with one data point, and you can draw a lot of lines through one data point. don't do things like take yes or no for an answer from your team. Have them explain it. And, even if you don't understand it, what's really cool is once they have to sit down and explain it to you or in front of someone else, they actually start finding their own faults in what they're saying because they have to actually work through and define it for you. That's critical. Another key portion of this is blame. I see, and especially in the news right now, everybody wants to blame everybody for everything and find somebody to point a finger at and fire somebody. And I'm not sure how that solves the problem. Blame is generally pretty counterproductive. Assigning blame, it really doesn't go about addressing what has to be done. You have to take the data, you have to look at what the team's doing and get the information from them so you can find the problem. If you're just in a world of blame, nobody's going to tell you what's going on because they're afraid you're going to use that information to turn around and blame them. And so blame really doesn't have a lot of part in any project that you're trying to recover. And as far as I'm concerned, in any project you're trying to run. I see that as a huge failure in cultures and easy to even correct at the project manager's level. Even if you're inside an organization that loves blame, you can shield your team from that by being the right type of project manager and not breed that type of culture inside your organization. So that's pretty much how I look at analyzing the problems, is the team and removing that blame.
We're moving on to step number 5, which is select the correct methodology. What do you mean by that?
Well, process, I take methodology and I don't want to get into an argument about agile versus waterfall and things like that. Methodology are the set of processes that you use to run something. It's the method in which you do it. And if you don't have the correct method, you're not going to achieve what you want to get done. Too often we hear people saying things like, well, we've always done it that way. And that's just not a good approach to doing anything. Just because it was done that way doesn't mean that there isn't a better way. Yes, we don't go and haphazardly change everything just because of the fact that we want to change things. But when we start finding areas that start to falter, then what we want to do is to look at it and try to analyze it and put the right set of processes on top of it so that we can make it move smoother. Sometimes it means we have to remove processes. Sometimes people put far too much process on top of stuff. They create a bureaucracy that slows us down and makes it so that we can't move forward. We have too much in our way. So quite a few times whenever we're recovering projects, one of the things we do is we really start stripping off process right and left to make that project move much smoother.
And then we're moving on to step number 6, which is negotiate the solution.
So one thing that I think that project managers really have to have and put in their back pocket is a strong understanding of how to negotiate. Too many times we feel that we need to walk in with here's what has to be done, some set of rules and say that this is what has to be done, and try to push that on people, and we're just going to go hammer on them until we get that way. We have to understand that it's not just us that has a set of rules and needs, and we need to understand what the other side needs. And understanding how to do proper negotiation means that you need to understand what your needs are, what your wishes are, what your desires are, and the same thing for the other side. What happens if they don't get something? What's that impact? What's that consequence of failing to get some component that you can't build in the project? Maybe there's something in the middle that you can do. And so negotiation is not a set of going in and trying to win. It is trying to understand how you meet in the middle to get the right kind of solution that gets your project out the door and gets the stakeholders to actually get what they need. Now, oddly enough, that could mean we cancel the project because it could be that the stakeholder needs to have some level of functionality. And if they don't get that level of functionality, then there's no reason to even carry the project forward. There's nothing wrong with canceling a project. Yes, it may bruise your ego, it may feel bad, but if it doesn't meet the strategic goals, it needs to be canceled. And really, the project manager should be the person who is sitting on top of that the whole time and saying, are we achieving value? Are we achieving value? Are we achieving value? If they're just a cheerleader for the project and try to get the project done at all costs, that is not the appropriate function for them. They need to be taking a look and delivering value. That's really the big delivery point of the project manager themselves.
Let me repeat the 7 steps to rescuing the problem project here for everybody. So step 0 is prevent future failure. Step 1, acknowledge the problem. Step 2, audit your projects. Step 3, analyze the data and develop solutions. Step 4, identify root causes and deploy changes effectively. Step 5, select the correct methodology. And step 6, negotiate the solution. As a final question for you, let's give some helpful tips to our project managers out there, because you said in step 1, acknowledge the problem. Denial is the biggest problem when it comes to, acknowledging that we do have a failing project here. What are some of the key performance indicators that you suggest our listeners take a look at on their own projects tomorrow to determine, are we green? Are we yellow? Are we red?
Well, I think that's a subjective term on the green, yellow, and red. What really are the indicators that your project is in trouble are other more subjective things. One that I've seen happen, a preponderance, it's all over the place, is people say, well, I just don't have any management support. And what is critical when you don't have management support is that the project is probably not aligned with some strategic goal for the company. So you need to step back and take a look at your project and make sure it actually matches up with the strategic goals of the company. And that will tell you whether your project is succeeding or failing faster than anything else, because you can be well within scope, schedule, and budget and have a complete failure if it doesn't match the strategic goals of the company. If it is matching the strategic goals of the company and you're over budget, is that really a failure, or did someone not spec the project out to begin with correctly? And so I kind of twist it around and start looking at what was the project supposed to be and understand how it matches. And if I need to have twice as much money to meet the strategic goal, then let me go find that or talk to someone about that, and now let someone else determine whether my project's red or whether it's green. That's the only way I know how to do it without trying to stick with numbers that can be very, very misleading. Like I say, I can deliver a project and be inside scope, schedule, and budget and still have a complete failure because people don't like it.
Wonderful. Todd, thank you very much for coming back on the program today and sharing with us the 7 steps to rescuing the problem project. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Cornelius. I enjoy being on your show. Let me know anytime I can talk to you and your audience and help anybody out.
And that was Todd C. Williams and the 7 steps on rescuing the troubled project. If you are preparing for your PMP exam, then the best way to calm the butterflies in your stomach is to take a practice exam. Our PMP exam simulator offers you 9 such practice exams. To see how it works and take a free test drive, please go to freeexamsimulator.com. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Until next time.